Who's got who over a barrel? G7 leaders pushing the idea of capping the price they pay for Russian oil and gas, effectively forcing Moscow to choose whether to supply at a discount or cut off the revenue stream of its pipelines. As energy prices soar at the outset of summer travel season, we'll ask our panel who blinks first and whether Moscow's gains on the ground in eastern Ukraine are at all offset by sanctions that have now triggered Russia's first debt default since the 1990s. Far from the front, the developing world feeling the pinch of inflation and the Kremlin's blockade of grain exports through the Black Sea. How does the G7 fight food insecurity and, more broadly, make global supply chains less dependent on the likes of Vladimir Putin and more sustainable in the face of not just war, but also, let's not forget, a climate emergency? Today in the France 24 debate, can the G7 stare down Russia? With us, Thierry Bros, professor at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
We welcome back Anna Credi, professor of economics at the University of Paris-Dauphine's Center for Geopolitics, Energy and Raw Materials.
Good evening.
Good to see you. Good to see as well Anton Kozlov, director at the International Center for the Study of Eurasia. Thanks for being with us.
Merci.
And Nicolas Meillan, senior advisor at EV Volumes, which stands for?
Electric Vehicle Volumes.
Electric Vehicle Volumes. All right.
Good evening, François.
Nice to see you. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Vladimir Putin seemed to be sending a calling card to the leaders gathering in the Bavarian Alps when, for the first time in weeks on Sunday, Kyiv was the target of a bombardment. This ahead of a call by Ukraine's president to the G7 to cap oil prices to Russia. Since we've had the news, since Volodymyr Zelensky spoke a couple of hours ago of a strike on a shopping center in the center of the country, Thomas Waterhouse has more on the stakes of that G7 summit.
G7 leaders and their special guests stand in the Bavarian sunshine for their traditional family photo. But at the group's latest gathering in the Alps, they've been standing united for much more than just a picture.
We will continue to provide financial, humanitarian, military and diplomatic support and stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. It's up to Ukraine to decide on a future peace settlement, free from external pressure or influence.
That statement came after discussions at the secluded Elmau Castle, where the Group of Seven said they've promised or are ready to provide over $29 billion for Ukraine and that fresh sanctions against Russia are in the pipeline.
We are discussing all the topics that are on the agenda, especially staying united in supporting the Ukraine against the Russian aggression. And we understood that the policies of all our countries are very much aligned.
Imagine if we allowed Putin to get away with the violent acquisition of huge chunks of another country, sovereign independent territory. The lessons for that would be absolutely chilling.
Leaders were also joined via video link for nearly 2 hours by Ukraine's president. Volodymyr Zelensky urged the G7 to end the war in his homeland before the cold and more difficult months of winter begin. He once again pushed for a sufficient supply of weapons and modern anti-missile defense. Zelensky also wants the group to cap the price of Moscow's oil exports, have Russia listed as a country that sponsors terrorism, and get crucial agricultural exports resumed.
So Thierry Bros, this concept of a cap on the price of oil, maybe we should break it down into two. First, the cap of oil, is that doable?
Well, first of all, remember that we've already agreed on an embargo. So the embargo on Russian oil should come at the end of the year. And now we are facing high prices, and so therefore we want to cap oil prices from Russia, which I think is a very stupid measure, because how are we going to do this? Remember that in the last 20 years, Europe was built on markets. We wanted markets to provide a fair price and to provide transparency. In Europe, we have markets. In the East, they have oligarchs. So I don't think it's a very good idea to have a set price? Who is going to set the price? Is it Ursula von der Leyen with Vladimir Putin? And how is this going to be transparent? So I think this is not a very wise measure.
You agree with that, Anna Caretti?
If we think in terms of really, I would say economic theory, pure economic theory, this is really unfeasible in the sense that you cannot target a specific producer and say we are going to put a limit on the price on the oil produced just by Russia. There is also the question on how this price could be set. In principle, you could find a price that is in the interest of one country, but not 27. And the other question is why this measure on capping prices? We have an alternative that is the reverse, that is imposing an import tax. That maybe is something that you could really do on specific producers, and in particular, in this case, Russia.
And why aren't they doing it?
I think that when given the specificities on how it works in terms of setting fiscal instruments in Europe, this is much more challenging in terms of the procedure that it can take in order to set an additional tax. However, we are in in an emergency time, and I think that some procedures could be escaped in order to reach consensus on something that is sound in terms of our economies.
Anton Kozlov, the Russians are saying, well, we're selling more than ever to the Chinese, to the Indians, most notably. They're selling at a discount, nonetheless. Is Russia feeling the pain at all when it comes to oil and gas?
Well, I think they certainly they do. It's certainly not as what the West would like, but there are problems. Of course, there are problems that are going to come up maybe a bit later, not necessarily right away. Even though I think in the month of May their revenues dropped. We also have, it's not just oil and gas. There are issues of their fiscal policy, the way they treat dollar versus ruble, and so on and so forth. So no, they are not necessarily already where G7 would like them to be, but they're going in that direction.
All right, Nico Ameillon, at this point in time, the problem is that we see the real time when it comes to war, sanctions take longer.
Well, sanction takes longer, but sanction backfire, actually. If you take only gas, people forget, but the price of gas has been multiplied by 4 times over a year. So basically, if Russia sells only 25% of what it sold a year ago, it would make the same money. And what people see, and I think what they want, is the global oil price to be capped, because now with inflation and central bank have to increase rates, which will obviously create a sovereign debt crisis. French debt, 10 years, is over 2%. And we are, I believe, getting into big troubles because we won't be able to afford our debt anymore.
Thierry Brosse, how much of this debt is down to the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think if we go back to energy, the energy crisis was before the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine just compounds this. And as was rightly said, I mean, now we have a climate crisis, an energy crisis, a war, and an economical crisis. And I think this is where governments are going to have to struggle to solve whatever they want, and the way they are going to solve it is going to be very important. I think, as you think, that the economic crisis and the war are to be solved first, not the energy crisis.
By the way, we had a hot mic incident at the G7. The president of France speaking with his U.S. counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, telling Joe Biden that he'd been on the phone with the president of the United Arab Emirates, MBZ, saying that he's at maximum capacity production when it comes to oil, talking about oil here, and that the Saudis can increase by 150,000 barrels a day, but not much more. Is that true?
Well, I suppose they are saying it's true, but what I think is very important, we have no spare capacity anywhere in the system. not in gas because we were relying on Gazprom, not in oil, very little in oil, not in electricity. I mean, look at the electricity nuclear park in France. So this is where the crisis is going to hit us very, very hard because we have absolutely no spare capacity in the system, and we've designed the system with spare capacity, and in the last 10 years we thought that this spare capacity was useless because we are going to consume less, which didn't happen.
And Akreti, we've talked about whether or not constituents, citizens have the resolve in light of what Thierry Brosse was just talking about. We're getting these horrific images of a shopping mall hit by missiles this Monday in central Ukraine, in places like your native Italy. Are people ready for what Nicolas described, this 3 or 4-fold increase in their energy bills?
Well, I think that there are a lot of contradictions that this crisis is unveiling. On one side, on the humanitarian side, it is impossible to bear the images that we just saw. On the other side is the citizen says, what I can do. And there are months and months that we are saying, well, there is one possible answer, that is rationalize the use of energy. But on the other side, the mechanism that could help people to make such an adjustment, that is prices, has been blocked. In most of the European countries, we have introduced measures to insulate consumers, and all consumers, not only the vulnerable ones, from the increase of the energy, gas, electricity, and oil. So there is this contradiction. On one side, we want prices to be low, and on the other side, we say to people, yeah, you have to consume less, which is, it is at odds, again, with economic theory.
At odds with economic theory, and yet we're seeing a bit of bravado on both sides. To think that it wasn't so long ago that they were calling this the G8, that Russia had a seat at the table, no longer.
Jackie talk, Jackie talk. All have to show them a tougher than Putin. Oh, yes.
Does any of this matter in Moscow, Anton Kozlov? These jibes on the part of Boris Johnson and friends?
Well, I think it does matter because certainly Putin and people in the Kremlin, they listen. Do they care? Frankly, I don't think Putin cares that much. But I think his financial advisors, the head of the central bank, his minister of finance and others, they do care. Because they clearly understand that sooner or later the war is going to end and there's life after the war. Putin, he's on a mission. He's got his tunnel vision. It's false history, I would say, but he's already up there somewhere in the space, high. Whereas the rest of the country, they would have to leave, and so people do understand that it is important that they have.
Because his argument is Russians can tough it out.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that there's apparently 30% of Russian households don't have normal bathrooms, therefore they don't care about the sanctions because they're used to living, basically in the woods. But I don't think this argument works. First of all, I think people got used to having higher standards of life since Putin actually came to power. And frankly, I think particularly the young people, they certainly do not appreciate what's taking place. Because they're used to traveling, they're used to having their iPhones, they're used to watching American films, they're used to be very international. Putin and his immediate circle, they're people, they're between 60 and 75. They're basically were made in the Soviet Union, were all ex-members of the Communist Party. Now they became overtly Christian Orthodox. I would say that, basically turning in the Orthodox Church into a totalitarian sect. So there's no future in this kind of ideology.
All right. Russia, by the way, defaulting on its debt this Monday for the first time since 1998. The Kremlin insists its coffers are full. It's all down to sanctions blocking transfers.
These attempts will in fact amount to outright theft. And these claims about default in Russia's economy are devoid of all legality. Russia made the required bond payments in currency due in May, and the fact they had been blocked by Euroclear and didn't come to recipients is not our problem. So, in this case, there's no reason to call this situation a default.
So, is he right, Thierry Bros?
Well, what we have to understand is we wanted to implement sanctions to hurt him more than it hurts us. That's what the theory of sanction. And so therefore, little by little, it's going to hurt him. Is he on a default, yes or no? This is a bit outside my field. But what we need to push is to push harder on Russia. And yes, we are facing some hardship on our side. But we have to understand that the hardship on our side should be lower than the stress on the Russian economy.
Then the stress on the Russian economy, it's not yet the case. Back in March, France shut down one of its last 3 coal-fired plants. Now the government says it's considering a restart of Saint-Avold, that's in Moselle, near the German border. What was your reaction, Nicolas Meillon, when you heard that?
Well, I think we've been a bit trained in this situation because when we closed Fessenheim a couple of years ago...
This was the nuclear plant near the German border.
Exactly, in the German border. We had to reopen some coal plants for the last winter. So we've been used to it. It's a bit of a shame because obviously it goes all the way against climate change. But I would say it's not the worst because China and India just announced they will produce 700 million tons more coal, which basically kills any engagement to do anything about the climate, because we haven't done anything over the last 20 years to discourage India and China to use coal. We're trying to discourage them to buy Russian oil, which is one thing, but the problem with climate change is coal. It's responsible for 60% of the CO2 emission increase over the last 20 years, and we haven't done a single thing to limit this. Do
you feel there's a silver lining in any of this, that now this is all coming to a head and we're talking about it? We're talking about it a lot on this set, at least.
I think we've been talking about climate for the last 20 years, but we didn't do much. And now it's a bit on the side. The problem is going to be energy security. And that's why Germany, France, Austria, Netherlands announced they will reopen coal plants. We are back to real politics. And obviously a country like Germany is going to suffer a lot if it gets less gas for its industry. It's not the case in France as we deindustrialized the country over the last 40 years, but in Germany they still have some industry and they need gas. And if they don't get the gas by Putin, they are in big trouble.
And Akreti, this brings us back to what you said earlier about we're being told to consume less.
Well, now...
Are we really being told to sacrifice?
I think that at least in France, we heard yesterday the 3 CEO altogether of the 3 majors.
They penned a column in one of the Sunday newspapers.
Yeah, it was on Sunday, waited on Sunday. That was Sunday to announce their position that for the first time since the beginning of the war was to really ask citizens to consume less. I think that it came a little bit late. They should have said before, because now people, first of all, there is no heating in this period, so they are less sensitive to this request, let's say. And also, the idea actually is how to preserve just the purchase power of citizens. So I'm not sure that
It's like we're having two different conversations at the same time.
It is a double speaking. Whether on one side we have the economy, and on the other side we have the citizens and struggling with the prices.
Yeah, this is the heads, again, of Total Energy, EDF, and the former state gas company, Engie, all calling on the French to reduce their energy consumption. Starting now, the best kind of energy remains the kind we don't consume, they wrote in that column. Is that greenwashing, Thierry Bros?
No, I don't think it's greenwashing for them because they are going to face the wall. I mean, we are going to face blackouts this winter. What's interesting, and I would agree with Anna here, is that it's those CEOs that are saying this, not the government. And remember, last time we've discussed the Repower EU program, it was pushing governments to do this. But this is highly unpopular. I mean, consume less at home, drive less, use a car which has a lower speed limit, etc., is not very popular, even after an election. So the question is, how are we going to do this? And those CEOs are doing, I would say, the minimum amount because they know that the system cannot stand the winter.
All right. And will those remarks be enough to assuage the fury of those who point to Total Energies' record 2021 profits in the first quarter? Total Energy made nearly 5 billion euros in profit of this year, this despite the pullout from Russia. And while the state shaves 18 cents in taxes here in France off every liter at the pump, Total is pledging a 10-cent rebate during July and August. The pressure on to do more, though.
Once more, I will ask Total CEO Patrick Pouyanné to make another effort. We'll discuss it, whether to extend the effort, to increase it, or both. The effort has to be spread out fairly.
Nico Emeillon, what can the government ask the CEO of Total, and what should they be asking?
Well, if you look what's have been decided in, there is two ways of doing it in Italy and in the UK. What they will do is put an exceptional profit tax on all companies, 25% in the UK. I think it's 10% in Italy. And in
Spain also.
And in Spain, and it's going to feed I think in the...
Is that going to eventually happen here in France, you think?
Well, apparently no, for the time being, because they obviously that would be kind of we are trying to take Soviet Union measures to tackle this problem with Russia, cap the price, big tax increase, and they don't really like this. So we'll see what he managed to get, and obviously he will get something. At least they will communicate about something. Will it impact the end consumer? I'm not sure. That will be very visible. Everybody else forget today we pay 2.5 euro a liter at the pump, but we should pay 2.7. And so it's going to go on just forever. I mean, I wanted to say something.
How is it even possible? Like, here we are, as you say, being squeezed. Ordinary consumers don't understand how it is possible to make record profits in that.
It is very much possible, and we haven't talked about it yet. But the problem, we talked about high oil price, but the real problem for the end customer, for you and me, it's not the oil price. It's the diesel price. It's the gasoline price, and it's a different price. If you buy today diesel, the oil equivalent price is $200 per barrel, because we have a constraint on refineries. And because we've been closing refineries before the COVID, because the government asked us to close the refineries to tackle climate change. So they've closed the refineries. And now with the COVID, we haven't filled it because the demand was low. And now it's coming back up again. And we have we have to have enough refineries. And so at the same time, Biden now is asking people to invest more and produce at maximum at refineries. But 2 years ago, he asked to close the refineries.
Yeah, but the problem was that they asked to close the refineries and to stop everything that was infrastructure, further infrastructure, without at the same time making real policy to decrease demand.
To reduce the demand, I agree.
So they have just increased the gap between the demand and the supply.
Thierry Bros?
Absolutely. I think we've disincentivized the Total Energy and the others oil companies to invest in the upstream. Go back 2 years, the IEA was saying oil.
This is the International Energy Agency.
Sorry, yes. We're saying oil is passé. We shouldn't invest more in oil. And so therefore, we have higher oil prices, higher diesel price, higher gas prices. And now we are saying exactly the opposite to those companies. But again, if you're a shareholder of those companies, you may think, well, I'm making a lot of money today. Why should I invest so more money? Because we are facing the oil and gas is a boom and bust system.
So what are these companies doing with those profits? Are they just paying out dividends, or are they investing them?
Buying back shares, paying dividends, investing a little bit in the green economy. But again, I mean, remember, we've told them exactly the opposite 2 years ago. We've told them, close your refinery, stop investing. And we are telling them, we don't know for how long we are going to need oil and gas. So that's very difficult, because if you're going to invest upstream and your oil and gas field is only going to be producing in 2 or 3 years, and then in 4 years, the European Union comes back with a 2030 target saying we are going to move out of gas. I mean, if you look at the Repower EU program, there is virtually zero gas demand going from 2030. So would you invest in a gas field in Nigeria, in the US, in Qatar to do this?
And despite this contradiction, nevertheless, I mean, they have been looking for all the CEO, not only in France. Everybody is looking for gases in Qatar, in Nigeria, in Azerbaijan. So they are trying to externalize the need that they have on increasing supply, because if there is a supply disruption, then people will say, oh, look, you are responsible for it. So I don't know which is the right strategy, but I think it is a very confusing one.
Nicolas Meillon?
There's been, energy constraint as we passed the maximum production of oil. It was in November 2018.
That's right. We're past peak oil. That's important.
Well, you can't say until you have to wait a couple of years that it doesn't go up this limit of 85 million barrels, because obviously it was passed also because Saudi Arabia and OPEC reduced their production. So now we will see how far they can go. But with Russia impacted now, with maybe 1-2 million barrels off from Russia, it will be probably very hard to go over 85 million barrels. But the problem is we had this constraint and we told the politicians to do something about it, but they never thought there was a problem with oil, because they would tell you, 40 years ago, we had 40 years of oil, and today we still have 40 years of oil, so oil is fine. During COVID, the oil price was minus $37. We are full of oil, no problems. Why? We have a problem with oil. We discover less and less oil year over year. We have India and China. They want to drive cars like us, and they're driving a big demand for oil. And, I think since I've come to visit you on this plateau over the last couple of years, every time I've said we need to start to save energy. And I think maybe Emmanuel Macron is not watching us now.
Well, he maybe not, because he's in the Bavarian Alps. But let me ask you, Anton Kozlov, because what we're talking about here, whether or not our homes are going to get heated next winter, it's a question of national security. And we had the same discussion when the COVID pandemic hit, about suddenly we're realizing that our economies are vulnerable on these global supply chains that go around the globe. We thought, oh, there are going to be lessons learned. Now there's war in Ukraine. And we're having the same conversation about global supply chains. Do you feel as though there will be lessons learned or not?
Well, frankly, I don't know. I wish, but I don't know. But regarding the oil supplies, I mean, we still have reserves untapped in Venezuela and Iran. They are under sanctions, and the United States can produce more. So I think there are ways of increasing the oil production, except that we need to talk about, and particularly Iran.
And it means shifting alliances.
It means finding ways of resolving the issues that we're having with those countries.
Thierry Bros?
Well, you could also find it thanks to new technology. I mean, you were looking at conventional oil. I mean, we've increased to 100 million barrels per day thanks to unconventional oil, which is the shale oil and shale gas from the US. And please keep in mind, without shale oil and shale gas revolution in the US, Vladimir Putin border wouldn't be discussed in Ukraine. It will be way different. So I think it's also a question of how do we accept this NIMBY process, because not in my backyard process, because all of us are happy to drive a car, be it petrol or electric, but we don't want the mining of oil to be there, the mining of rare earths to be there, etc., etc. And I think this is something we need to think in terms of security of supply going forward.
So what are they discussing at the G7 really in that case? Are they talking about what we're discussing here?
Well, I'm not so sure they are looking at us. I think sometimes those leaders are looking at magic maths more than anything else. They believe that capping the oil price in Russia will solve the problem. I think we are in this crisis for the next 5 years. We need to address it, as Anna was saying, and we were saying many times on this in this studio. We need to say to the French citizen and the European citizen, you need to consume less. That's really the only thing we can do right now. And then in the next 3, 4, 5 years, we need to produce more. It has to be oil and gas. Hopefully it won't be coal, but this is the next step. If you do it the other way around, we are going to stay in this crisis for longer.
Good luck, though, Anna Credi, getting elected in France or Italy with a platform of wear an extra sweater and turn down the thermostat.
Why not? I mean, it's a question of mindset. So for the moment, this idea of the jacket, not the yellow ones, but the jackets during winter has been made. Had circulated only in restricted areas. So it is economists, the International Agency of Energy. But if a politician could make the example, maybe it would be an additional message. But on the other side, yes, we need to. It's like a race against time. We need to increase the piece of renewables. We have to go further with hydrogen. We have to introduce synthetic fuels. There's a room for innovation, but it is for the next 5 years.
Room for innovation in the next 5 years. We're poking fun at politicians, but are we the problem, us consumers and citizens? Not they're just the reflection of us. When I ask this question, because when you look at the energy mix that Anna is talking about, on the one hand, we are concerned when we see, like we've seen in France over the last couple of weeks, these golf ball-sized hailstones, extreme weather incidents that are sharply on the rise. On the other, everybody wants to go on vacation this summer. They all want to get on a plane or on a train.
Well, they've been a bit blocked in France at their flat for the last 2 years. So I think if you come and say, save climate, stay at home forever, I'm not sure you'll be elected, by the way. But you were wondering what they were saying at the G7, but I think we heard it because we heard Boris Johnson saying it. We need to show our pecs. That's what they've been doing for the last 6 months. We try to show our pecs, but okay, good. What's the impact of it?
Antoine Kozla?
No, I think I would like to remind that in 2014, when the whole story in Ukraine started, I think in October and November, when the shale oil came on the market, the oil prices collapsed and the Russian ruble collapsed. So, and that was a very serious blow to Putin back in the end of 2014. So it is something that, to consider.
And this was something that we recall back in the 1980s when the United States wanted to weaken the Soviet Union. Back in those days, you could pick up the telephone and call the Saudi king. And we're going to see Joe Biden going to Jeddah next month.
Yeah, no, but I think there are ways, and I think you have to be open and creative,
Well, on this side, I mean, in 2014, yes, the price of oil collapsed from $1 and $10, but that was also linked to the change in the Fed policy, which increased its rate and increased the value of the dollar, and which impact the price of the oil in dollar in the other way. But the thing is now, what's the room? I agree, they've been talking with Iran for the last couple of months, but we haven't managed to reach an agreement. But maybe Iran could provide maybe 1-2 million barrels per day, probably. But Venezuela, I mean, they have not been investing for the last couple of years. They have been under sanctions by the Americans, who tried to get rid of Maduro but did not succeed. And now they are coming back to Venezuela, which
They're starting to talk.
which have highly artificial reserves, the first in the world, but it's a very low quality oil, very hard to extract, a lot of investment required, a lot of Western companies. So this one, maybe in the midterm, but now if you want to have an oil, and you're right, if we go back not even in 2014, but in 1985, how did the Soviet Union collapse? Because there was the oil counter shock, where the US asked Saudi Arabia to open the valves, and they were producing. They went from 4 million barrels per day to 10 million. And that sent the price to the floor. And that eventually killed Russia. So this worked. But you need 5 million barrels. We're never going to get them.
Never going to get them, Thierry Bros?
Well, I think we can get them in a non-conventional area. I mean, we have to look at Canada can do this. I mean, remember, the first Biden decision was to stop the Keystone pipeline that was supposed to bring oil from Canada to the US. And now he goes to Saudi Arabia to get more oil. Try to understand what makes sense here. So there is possibility in Canada, there is possibility in the US. I mean, Norway can do a bit more. I mean, you've seen the EU commissioner that was in Norway last week, and they've agreed, Norway and the EU, to ship more gas from Norway to the EU. So there are element. It's going to take time. It's going to take those 3, 4, 5 years because this is the energy time. And this is why we are here paying the dividend of 15 years of stupid energy policies. That's where we are. We didn't want to have diversification of supply. We believed that being too dependent on Russia was not an issue. We didn't want to have spare capacity in the system. We are paying it now, full price.
Yeah, we also had the directives on security of supply that were never put in conformity in the States. So
because we didn't think there'd be a situation like this again.
It was completely overlooked, completely neglected. And if we go back in the past, 2014, you said the Russian, the rebel were very ill. But then what they have said, they have invaded Crimea. So they have again put the pressure on the system, and they have shown that they could again use gas as a weapon, and we forgot it.
Yeah, well, they used gas as a weapon back in 2006, I think, 2005.
Yeah, but just to remember the last episode, if we can go back even farther, but I agree with you that we have really relayed on the idea there would be a solution. There would be a solution, an automatic one.
And I think we need also to consider producing home, not only oil, gas, renewable, but as much as possible we need to produce home, because this is the best security of supply.
Renewables,
yes. Yeah, renewable, oil, gas, whatever. I mean, you've seen Denmark and others reopening, or the UK reopening the possibility to produce more oil and gas. We need to produce those home, because if you produce it home, you're less dependent from the others. And also, those are cleaner. What we produce in Europe is cleaner than what we produce anywhere else in the world.
Nicolas Meillan, you agree?
Well, that's the big French hypocrisy, which was the largest importer of shale gas in March from the US. But we can't produce shale gas in France, and we can't even look if we have shale gas in France. So maybe it's the time to think about it. And I agree, in the US, when they produce shale gas, they don't have to respect the norms on protection of water, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act. They don't have to do this. In Europe, we have the stringent norms. And this story about shale gas produced in France and in the US, it's the story about the industry.
So are you saying we should loosen our environmental regulations here?
If we reindustrialize the country and produce it in France rather than in the US or in China, it will be better for the planet and for the climate change. And obviously also better for us.
You agree with that, Anna Credi?
It's hard because this kind of answer really would require to make the calculation of the CO2 emissions that we save or not, comparing one opportunity to the other, and how this is going to fit with the if we can say this word today, with the commitment of the Paris Agreement. So I'm not sure that it is something that really has to be analyzed into detail. So how much do we emit today, and how we could do if we reactivate this local production?
All right, we're talking about the fear of what's going to happen next winter. Before that, there's the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, which is that pipeline that bypasses the continent and goes via the Baltic Sea. It's going to be closed for summer maintenance. There are fears it may not reopen afterwards. The Russian gas may no longer flow to Germany. What happens at that point?
Well, I think Gazprom is playing the uncertainty principle. So we don't know what they are going to play next. There is this maintenance. They've cut it by 60% recently, and we don't know what's next. I think we need to be prepared to the fact that the end game is zero Russian gas, zero Russian oil. It doesn't need to be capped. It has to be zero. It has to be zero as fast as possible. Because if we are going to zero, then the gas volumes can't be sold into China, so that's for sure, and the oil can be sold into China, but with a huge discount. So we solve this problem. And then there is a question, how is this going to hurt us? Yes, we are going to be hurt by higher inflation. But the question is, how do we try to mitigate this going forward? What we all know is that Germany is a systemic risk in the gas system. If Russia completely stopped gas today to Europe, Germany is a systemic risk.
It's vulnerable.
It's not only it's vulnerable, but you will have a German utility that will be bankrupt. And so the question is, how are going to be the trade of energy going forward in Europe at a time where it is the traders that are balancing the market? It's not the politicians. It's not the G7 that tells you these molecules need to go there and there. It is the traders. So what happens if one major German utility goes bankrupt, which is what the minister in Germany was talking about, a systemic Lehman Brothers risk. So we are facing this, and we need to consider this, and we need to be prepared for this.
We could have a Lehman moment with big energy giants?
Yeah, I'm not the pro of Lehman, so I won't comment on this. But what I want to comment on is the fact that we've been very clever in Europe, because the electricity price is indexed on the price from Vladimir Putin on the gas. And obviously that's a problem, because if you reduce the gas availability, then the price of electricity is going to skyrocket, and it's going to impact everybody. And we have obviously no B plan, except reopen a couple of old coal plants here and there in Europe. And this is something which has to be addressed as soon as possible in Europe. We can't have our electricity prices based on Vladimir Putin gas prices.
All right, so this is the immediate concern here, Anton, that when you look at the fear that blackouts, brownouts, and skyrocketing prices that working class and middle class people can't afford. But what about Russia? Before the invasion of Ukraine, we were about to open Nord Stream 2. We think that everything's always about economics, but in this case, is it?
Well, I think it's a question of how Putin and his immediate circle perceive security of Russia. I think that's what is really at stake here, is their vision of security.
Because you heard Thierry Brosse say, the end game now is weaning all of Europe off of Russian gas and oil. So they're going to lose customers if that happens.
Well, I don't think they believe that that's how it's going to develop. I don't think they believed, and I don't think they still believe that Europe will end all economic, or let's say energy ties to Russia. I think they thought it's going to, they're going to swallow, just like Europe swallowed Crimea. And Donbass since 2014. So frankly, I think there is a basic misunderstanding on both sides. On the side of Russia, how the West would react, and on the side of the West about Russia.
And now, what next?
Well, it's we are facing a new reality. It's a war at the heart of Europe, we can say, and certainly, I won't be able to say what's going to happen next, but I think we're going towards a situation when Europe is going to suffer economically, Russia is going to suffer economically, and I think politically. and what will be how this crisis is going to be resolved. I mean, frankly, I don't know, because I was absolutely persuaded that Russia is not going to attack Ukraine, because it was the most senseless thing to do.
And that's where we are today. We'll have to leave it there, unfortunately. Much more to talk about. I want to thank you, Anton Kozlov. I want to thank Thierry Brosse, Nicolas Meillan, Anna Creti. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.